In early October 1911, 60,000 soldiers of the Qing Empire's Beiyangnu Army gathered at Yongping in Hebei province to be introduced to a new weapon, the Maxim heavy machine gun. The soldiers in the Beiyangnu Army probably had no idea of the new weapon's power. In 1893, a small detachment of British soldiers fought with 5,000 Matabele warriors with the help of 4 Maxim heavy machine guns in the conquest of Matabeleland in Zimbabwe. The Africans suffered 3,000 casualties. They were not even able to come within 100 British soldiers. Before the emergence of the machine gun, it was impossible that so few could defeat so many in the history of war. After its brief debut at the Beiyang Army's training ground, the gun soon made its presence felt on Chinese battlegrounds. On October 10, 1911, the Wuchang Uprising broke out. Revolutionaries quickly seized the arsenal. They had no idea that they would soon be facing strong opposition, Beiyang soldiers armed with Maxim heavy machine guns.
马克沁机枪也是号称世界上杀人最多的一个武器。你看前后共杀死过300万人。
As soon as the two armies clashed, the revolutionaries began to suffer heavy losses due to machine gun fire from the Beiyang troops. Poorly trained soldiers began to tremble upon hearing the sound of Maxim machine gun. Even Huang Xing, the leader of the Chinese Revolutionary Alliance, admitted that the Revolutionary Army was no match for the Qing government troops because of their lack of weapons to match the machine guns. What was so unique about this weapon?
马克沁机枪出现以前都是非自动枪，那么这个装弹呢，要么就是单发装填，要么就是呢几发装填以后一发一发的打。
对于武器来说，它是一个第一个靠火药燃气来完成自动动作的一个自动化的武器。
Before the Maxim gun, there were already several machine guns throughout the world, such as the Gatling, Gardner, and Nordenfeldt guns. Most of these guns employed multiple barrels and relied on actual mechanical cranking for rapid fire. The Maxim distinguished itself as the world's first truly self-powered machine gun. How did Hiram Stevens Maxim, the American-born British inventor and an ordinary engineer, achieve this?
他当时是一个爱迪生的一个有力、一个比较有潜力的一个竞争对手。这时候他后来的别人说呢，你呀，不要搞电器了，你现在的世界形势，你要搞一个迅速的大规模的杀人武器，那么肯定你这个要发大财。
In 1882, Maxim traveled to Britain to look for answers to the problem of an automatic firing system. He discovered that the recoil of rifles often gave soldiers bruises on their shoulders. Maxim reasoned that the recoil, which comes from the gas when the cartridge is fired, contains energy. Thus, he had found a source of energy to power his idea of an automatic firing system.
马克沁利用这种原理，他奠定了现代枪械的自动的基础，在这之前是没有的。
Maxim utilized the energy of the recoil gases to obviate the need to reload the weapon manually. By ejecting the spent cartridges while inserting the next one, the potential firing rate was massively increased.
就是咱们前面讲的这个手摇的手工操作的机枪来说，那些机枪的射速一般都在300发以下。它这个呢，马克沁机枪呢，可以达到400到600这么高的一个水平。
The rate of fire of older types of machine guns was subject to the gunner's experience and physical strength. The Maxim gun was fully automatic. Maxim even devised a locking mechanism for it, which would ensure the gun would continue firing even if there was no pressure on the trigger.
自动 武器对于非自动武器的概念，它提升武器战斗能力的一个最典型的要素，就是它增大了发射率。
The harnessing of recoil gases and an effectively designed firing mechanism fueled the Maxim gun with endless kinetic energy. A 6-meter-long 360-round canvas belt makes this gun an effective killing machine.
那咱们现在看到的马克沁机枪枪身这一部分实际上咱们是一个马克沁机枪的一个弹弹。这个弹弹呢，主要是用2层的帆布，然后再加上中间的那个钢板，然后通过铆接形成的。
The belt feed system is yet another great invention contributed by Hiram Maxim to the history of automatic weapons. The older feed systems were prone to malfunction, and the belt feed system minimizes the tendency of jamming and offers more ammunition for continuous fire. The impact of the belt feed system is far-flung, and it is still adopted in rapid-fire weapons today.
然后弹弹呢，通过这个枪身上的这个供弹系统，也就是咱们现在看的这一部分收弹器啊，同时里面还有拨弹机构。拨弹机构就是在每射击一次，然后把这个子弹往枪里面拨进去一发，这样的话保证整个枪身能够不间断的进行连续射击。
Now, turn back to that Matabele battlefield in 1893. It's no wonder, after knowing how the Maxim gun works, that a mere fifth could fight off an overwhelming force. Assuming that each of the 4 Maxim guns was equipped with 250-round canvas belts, the British soldiers could put out a lethal storm of over 2,000 rounds per minute. Although the Matabele force was over 5,000 strong, their weapons were merely spears that could be thrown a distance of a few dozen meters at most. The British side had won before firing the first shot. But even after the Maxim gun had proved its worth on the battlefield, the major powers were not serious about mass equipping their armies with the new weapon. Not even the British, who had benefited greatly from it. Why was this?
原来的作战模式，原来的军事指挥员对它的积极的作用认识不透。
This is a photo of Li Hongzhang's visit to London in 1896 as the Qing's government's special envoy. He was inspecting a new weapon, the Maxim gun. Within a matter of several minutes, bullets fired by the machine gun cut a grown tree in half. He exclaimed, "That's so fast!"
太快！然后一问价格呢，哎呀，太贵！
There were 2 reasons for the high cost. The gun had a much more intricate firing system than other guns and had been made by hand, while the high firing rate meant the cost of ammunition would also be high.
1分钟打几千发子弹，1秒钟打10几发。第一，浪费；第二，假如是用步枪的话，1枪可以打倒它。
Continuous rapid fire is the greatest quality of the Maxim gun. But the rise in ammunition consumption hindered the large-scale adoption of the gun. This problem existed for the entire length of the history of the Maxim gun. In this Chinese new encyclopedia of the Maxim gun, the editor lists the problems with the weapon as high ammunition consumption, jamming of the breech, and lack of reliability. Li Hongzhang's misgivings meant that he only brought 3 back to China. The armies of other nations had similar concerns. Another factor that prevented the increase in use of the Maxim gun was the established popularity of hand-cranked guns like the Gatling. China's arsenals still manufacture the Gatling gun in large quantities. In 1892, the Jinling Manufacture Bureau alone produced 20 Gatling guns. The Maxim gun would probably have sunk into oblivion were it not for the Russo-Japanese War, which occurred in Chinese territory. The war changed the opinions of world's military men about the Maxim. In the winter of 1905, thousands of Japanese soldiers charged towards a position held by a Russian garrison in Port Arthur. The Russians were equipped with several Maxims. They mowed down platoon after platoon of the Japanese infantry as they pressed their attack the whole day. The corpses filled the ravines on the hillside. When the Japanese finally took the position, they had sustained over 17,000 casualties. A British military observer at the time said that when the infantry are equipped with Maxims, the cavalry have nothing left to do but be cooks. Those who had been skeptical about the value of the Maxim against anything other than primitive armies saw their effectiveness against modern armies as well. For two armies of about equal strength, the one equipped with the Maxim would easily gain the upper hand.
固守的一方不但有堑壕，有铁丝网，再加上机枪，这样的话使进攻的一方非常非常难。对机枪不是特别信任的人，马上都感觉到了机枪的重要性。
Many nations, including China, began to purchase Maxim guns shortly after the Russo-Japanese War. After the Revolution of 1911, the Maxim gun became a highly valued weapon for revolutionaries. Li Liejun, newly appointed governor of Jiangxi, executed political prisoners with his Maxims to intimidate would-be dissenters. During the 1920s, the Maxim gun was top of the shopping list for warlords of all factions. Wu Peifu even used them to guard his residential compound and equip an armored train. But most nations still believed in the primacy of artillery on the battlefield. But there was one exception: Germany. The German army had 11 machine gun battalions set up as early as 1903. In 1908, the Germans upgraded the Maxim gun and named the new version MG-08. They also conducted a lot of theoretical research to tap the potential of the Maxim gun. The Chinese New Encyclopedia of the Maxim gun, published in 1940, is a translated version of the German manual. The book explained in detail the principle of the mechanical structure of the gun, the maintenance of its parts, troubleshooting, and shooting practices. It even clearly and strictly dictated the choosing of the fighting ground, the use of terrain, and the maneuvering routes of the machine gun crew. This is a group photo of a machine gun crew from the German Saxony 780th Infantry Regiment. The group showed what a Maxim machine gun crew looked like. There were usually 6 to 7 members. The gunner was in the center, with his target spotter, the squad leader on his left, and his loader on his right. The 3 other members of the squad were there to provide support and protection. Such an arrangement solved the issues of ammunition supply and transportation, bringing the potential of the Maxim gun to its fullest. German research on the heavy machine gun and its tactical use was soon applied in the field when the First World War broke out. The Germans placed 1,600 Maxim machine guns at key locations to provide defensive fire support. Such a creative tactic concentrated firepower and greatly expanded the zone of fire. The German firepower was so effective that the Allies believed the number of Maxims in German service exceeded 20,000 at the beginning of World War I.
这个马克沁重机枪，在这个当时这个战争中应用，你像最典型的一个战例，就是一战时期那个索姆河。
In 1916, the First World War dragged itself into a stalemate between the two sides. The Allies launched the Battle of the Somme in northern France in an effort to break the German lines. The battle began on June 24th with a 7-day-long barrage by over 2,000 artillery pieces. At around 7:30 a.m. on the 8th day, over 100,000 British soldiers leapt out of their trenches and advanced towards the German lines. The attackers assumed their enemy would have been obliterated by the bombardment. But they had no idea that as many as 1,600 machine gunners had already dragged 400 Maxim guns over from their underground bunkers to specific firing positions. A death trap awaited the charging British forces.
Strommel和战役，当时德国在那个面对英法联军40公里的正面上，据资料介绍，大概是每隔100米就是架一挺马克沁机枪。
As the attackers approached, the German gunners opened fire. Within minutes, thousands of British soldiers were killed. The Allied casualties exceeded 60,000 on the very first day of the battle.
就一天下来，6万人的死伤，其中大部分都是由马克沁机枪造成的。
不死就是英雄。这次的战争呢，当时的一个营长蒙哥马利，就是属于幸存者，没有被这个德国机枪所扫中，所以后来成为英国的元帅。
A war correspondent reported being told by one of the officers in the battle that bullets had seemed to rain down from the sky. Bullets hit some soldiers in their shoulder and came out at their wrist. The scene was like the Grim Reaper sweeping across no man's land with its scythe. Common sense would expect that a bullet fired from the barrel of a rifle or a machine gun has a straight trajectory. To shoot a target, the shooter must align the target and the gun sight into a straight line. So why did the bullet seem to come from the sky?
Its 使用是介于枪和炮之间的一个武器的一个使用方式。马克沁机枪当时的使用呢，它是用一个就是叫纵深散布射的这么一个打击方式。
The high muzzle velocity meant that bullets fired from the Maxim traveled in a parabolic trajectory. The fire would come down in an arc, creating a spherical killing zone among the enemy forces. As such, the gunner did not need to be able to see his target. He simply fires to a combination of pre-marked range settings on the tripod stand.
弹道打出去以后，是一个先上升，然后再下降的一段。咱们现在很多机枪大部分都是利用这个上升段，或者说前面这个比较直的这一段。那时候的重机枪使用也是上去以后掉下来，这个掉下来的这个区域就是我的命中区域。
With this new method of firing the Maxim gun, the 400 German machine guns created a metal hailstorm for the British and the French forces. Because the bullets rained down from the sky, the evasion training that the attackers had diligently exercised in their barracks were rendered useless. Dispersion fire could strike an enemy in a pre-designated area. There was no need to take aim. the machine gun crew could hide inside a bunker while shooting at the enemy. This new method of warfare terrorized those on the receiving end. This photo shows a German machine gun crew using the indirect fire mode. The entire crew are hidden inside their bunker. Under this indirect fire mode, the Maxim gun has a range of 4,000 meters, enabling it to threaten the enemy's position or supply line. Deployed in this way, each Maxim gun became a ghost, spitting bullets seemingly out of nowhere, claiming soldiers' lives day and night. There was not an inch of land that was totally safe on the battlefield. One could be struck by a bullet even if he hid himself inside a 2-meter deep trench. The Encyclopedia of War and Weaponry described the Maxim gun as a weapon that marked the end of an era. The emergence of the Maxim gun changed infantry battle formations and struck a decisive blow to the use of cavalry, which were considered the elite forces at the time. During the First World War, a war correspondent wrote that when the proud British cavalry charged the German positions, they were torn to pieces by the fire of the Maxim guns. The Maxim gun made the cavalry, as well as the old way of fighting, obsolete.
现代武器的进步，尤其是自动武器的出现，对于整个的过去的那种战争甚至叫军事斗争的这个影响的巨大。
The emergence of the Maxim gun made the tactic of infantry charges in dense columns obsolete. The rules were altered as the Maxim gun ushered in a brand new era in the history of weaponry. Although the Germans would eventually succumb to a new weapon known as tanks and lose the war, no one could deny the fact that the Maxim gun was successful. That explained why the Treaty of Versailles clearly dictated that Germany should never again get hold of weapons like the Maxim gun. However, sanctions from the international community upon Germany did not prevent the Maxim gun from rearing its head again. The MG-08 heavy machine gun soon found active service in China. It was the secret weapon of the Imperial Qing armies. It was also the most powerful weapon the revolutionaries had in their war to overthrow their feudal rulers. Both the Japanese Air Force and Army feared it. It wasn't a perfect weapon, but it was essential in turning the tide of war. Please join us for part 6 of Super Weapons. The Battle of the Somme spotlights the use of the Maxim gun in trench warfare. Its popularity in both offensive and defensive roles made it a superstar. It acted as a stimulus to change and forced progress in the development of the world's weaponry, ushering in the new era of the fully automatic firearm. Germany adopted it for their aerial combat in World War I, marking the onset of early air warfare. The British mounted the Maxim on primitive tanks, while the Russians mounted it on their armored trains. It inspired John Browning, the famous American firearms designer, to develop a newer model. In China, it was issued to the Qing Courts Guard set up in 1907, thus forming Asia's first Maxim gun troop, equipped with over 24 of these guns. Later, a Maxim battalion was set up in Yunnan. Even after copying the gun, the country's poor manufacturing capability failed to meet demand.
品啊，它的用钢，我们自己还不能国产。
Even the allegedly well-equipped Northeast Army was issued fewer than 10 Maxims for every infantry division. Nanjing's Jinling Arsenal produced an average of 300 units per year in 1927 to 1935, spiking in 1936.
战前的这个是这个机枪的这个生产能力，大概各个厂加在一起，才能生产1000多挺。
Facing the Japanese occupation of the Northeast in 1931, the nationalist government decided to replace and upgrade their troops' equipment. Finance Minister Kong Jiangxi in 1934 signed an agreement with German gunmaker Hapro, which gave China the blueprints for the Maxim. Production began in 1935, and by 1937 the annual output reached over 600 Maxims, doubling the 1935 level. In an internal report, the KMT Minister of Military Administration Department He Yingqing praised the Jinling Arsenal for its Chinese Type 24 heavy machine gun, an excellent clone of the German MG-08, which was more flexible and suitable for anti-aircraft use. The major modification after World War I that marks the Maxim as multifunctional is replacement of its four-legged sled mount with a tripod. This seemingly minor change turned out to be the most complicated, especially for the Type 24's mounting. An individually adjusted mechanism each for the tripod and for the connection bar fully accommodated rapid assembly and tactical adaptability to different landforms. Under the connecting bar, there was an accessory box for the spare bolt. One leg doubled as a case storing the spare barrel. Along with the extra bolt, these two spare parts were sorely needed.
然后咱们再看这一块，这一块呢实际上是枪架和枪身的一个连接的接口，同时呢这个位置可以接一个高射杆。
World War I saw the rapid rise of the aircraft as a weapon system. Facing this threat, ground armies were caught unprepared. The Maxim stands out as a preferred anti-aircraft weapon thanks to its powerful and continuous firepower.
这它作为防空武器，一个就是要求火力持续性比较长，因为空中的目标一般的它运动速度都比较高，这个武器要有一个是比较高的一个射速，另外一个比较远的一个射程，再一个呢还要威力比较大。
This World War I photo depicts German troops in an anti-aircraft exercise, with an MG-08 positioned on a stump and equipped with an anti-aircraft ring sight. This photo of a Russian air defense position shows a Russian M1910 deployed on a makeshift rack. The gap was then filled by the Chinese manufacturer, whose Type 24 had an adapter for joining the anti-aircraft extension on a tripod mount. The added value of the improved design was soon reflected during the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression in 1937. At that time, the Japanese easily dwarfed China's embryonic air force of only 305 fighters. Their 2,700-plus aircraft soon gained command of the air, raiding defenses, factories, and bridges. An urgent need for defense made the Maxim an ideal choice, which was issued to KMT troops with an anti-aircraft extension for every 6 guns to strengthen the capacity of the infantry battalions. In 1937, prior to withdrawal, Gunner Zhao Xiaoqiang with the 3rd Army Group was issued a brand new Maxim after a brutal engagement with the Japanese Army in Dezhou, Shandong.
我们转移到大汶口，大汶口有一个桥，在那儿也有一个大汶河，这个有一个桥梁。
The bridge that the withdrawing forces had to cross was already on the radar screens of the Japanese bombers. To protect it against destruction at the hands of the enemy, Zhao and his folks set up their Maxims in an anti-aircraft formation.
"那时候投弹也不能水平投弹，都是俯冲投弹，所以说他一投弹，我们就马上都射击。
Just as the Japanese Types 92 and 95 were approaching the bridge, Zhao's Maxim gun company shot at them with a suppressive crossfire.
所以保护这个桥始终，他一射击他不敢低飞了，一不敢低飞，所以他瞄不准，所以说那个桥始终都没有被炸坏。
The Japanese bombers finally fled. Months earlier, they had got the worst of it thanks to the Maxim. In September 1937, the Japanese military clamor to annihilate China within 3 months was stalled at Jiangyan Fortress for 3 months. Their 300 fighters encountered strong resistance from Chinese troops, whose anti-aircraft capable Maxims combined with naval guns fired over 10,000 rounds, gunning down over 20 Japanese planes within 2 days. It still saw service in the Vietnam War, during which the Vietnamese People's Army shot down several Charlie Company Huey helicopters in one battle, causing over 300 casualties. Though they have a higher accuracy, rifles have a lower firing rate. It takes about 5 seconds for an experienced shooter to manually eject the spent shell and reload, firing only 12 rounds per minute. A single Maxim, on the other hand, can in theory shoot 600 rounds per minute, equivalent to the firepower of 50 rifles. What's more, the Maxim can fire continuously for hours, absolutely impossible for a rifle. By the end of October 1937, the Battle of Shanghai is drawing to a close, with a Japanese elite division in hot pursuit of the National Revolutionary Army's 88th Division. To stall enemy advances, 400 Chinese troops at the Shanghai Sihang warehouse employed 4 Maxims with sufficient ammo and a successful counterattack against the Japanese using various inferior weapons.
尾巴一下子，它是等一下装弹，把它尾巴给出去。
There's another little-known story behind this well-known defense. Tsai Tsing-kai, commander of the famous 19th Corps, had a trump card. Although mounted with a cannon, the 20-plus Maxims were their primary defensive weapons. During the Battle of Shanghai, the Japanese troops had to resort to cannons to fight the Maxim-equipped Chinese. Otherwise, they would have suffered even more severe casualties. This is because the Type 92 issued to the Japanese military couldn't rival the Maxim. It's a modified version of a Type 3 heavy machine gun, while the Type 3 is a copy of the Hotchkiss M1914. The 1905 Russo-Japanese War witnessed a humiliating defeat of the Hotchkiss by the Russians' Maxim. 30 years later, the duel was restaged in China. It's hard to understand, however, that the Hotchkiss lost again, though upgraded and modified. Why did the Maxim always dwarf the Hotchkiss and its derivatives? Both are heavy weapons, but they differ significantly in terms of technology. The 7.7mm caliber Type 92 is gas-operated and air-cooled, while the 7.92mm caliber Maxim is short recoil-operated and water-cooled. The Type 92 is ammo strip-fed, likely causing jams in the loading, while the Maxim is fed from canvas belts reliably holding over 250 rounds. October 9, 1938, witnessed the Battle of Wanjialing in Jiangxi Province. Commander Zhuge Yue surrounded the Japanese 101st Division with 100,000 Chinese troops. Ito Masayoshi, the lieutenant general of the surrounded division, ordered his men to make a breakthrough at all costs. Facing the enemy's charge, the Chinese Maxim gun company successfully repelled 15 attacks.
这个机枪它能转的，45度这90度这它能转开的，那个面积大，那个杀伤也大，那个手上那个叶子都穿的全是子弹孔。
The Battle of Wanjialing witnessed the Chinese Army's first engagement that destroyed a Japanese division, shocking the entire world. Not only the Maxims, but also the gunners played a crucial role in the victory. In a field hospital, Tang Guilin, a wounded gunner, surprised everyone. She was a woman disguised as a man. This was revealed as surgeons prepared to operate. Jiao Yingzhu was another heroine operating the Maxim in a subsequent battle. Instead of trigger squeezing, the Type 24 featured a straight pull trigger. There was a recoil-reducing mechanism added on the muzzle that also reduced the leakage of gas produced by the explosion of the powder. That's another reason why the Maxim always beat the Type 92. In spite of all these pros, the Maxim had its definite cons. The Second World War saw the rise of the Blitzkrieg as a new military tactic, exposing the bulky Maxim's problematic areas. They were awkward to mount on motorcycles or to use to follow rapid movements of infantry. The Maxim began to show its flaws. The year 1947 saw its complete failure in an engagement in which a KMT elite division was encircled by a communist field army on top of the 400-meter-high Mount Menlianggu.
他是在山头上，他山头上取水都困难，我们呢在山下往上攻，我们水都困难，所以这样呢，74师在重机枪应用上，我们是由于水源充足，我们在整个战斗中发挥了很大作用。
Its biggest disadvantage was its dependence on water cooling. Without water, firing could not be sustained for long as the barrel might warp.
要加水，半公斤水，要不加水，个子弹打去，要枪管要打红的嘛，打锐的嘛。
That's why it was crucial to incorporate water cooling when designing the Maxim. This is a Type 24 with a water cooling jacket that has a seemingly simple exterior but a fine interior. The continuous firing at a high rate overheats the barrel, evaporating the water inside the tube.
这样的话呢，马克沁机枪呢，它就是在那个枪管上方平行的有一根管子，管子上面还有一个套管，套管前后各有一个孔。
When it shoots down, the slider jacket moves forward, shutting off the front end vent and forcing steam out from the rear. The opposite holds true when it shoots up.
蒸汽直接冒出来，在冬天的时候会形成一个白雾，形成一个白雾以后，因为它气体冒出来了以后，碰到那个冷空气以后。 它形成白雾，形成白雾呢，就是一个是容易暴露自己，第二个呢，就是这个射手在后头就看不清目标了，前面就是一团雾。
To resolve the issue, a ventilation attachment is added to direct steam into a separate container where it can again condense into water for reuse, eliminating the fog effect. Another con is its 6-meter-long canvas belt, occasionally causing some problems.
它这个受潮，下雨了什么潮湿啊什么的，它这个张力就不一样，会出现造成打不连呢，这个卡的故障，就是一般顶弹或者是跑这个进弹不畅这种故障。
In spite of its flaws, the Maxim remained the primary firearm, playing a decisive role in China's struggle for liberation. October 1948 saw the KMT's 11 reinforcing divisions relieving the PLA besieged Jinzhou in Liaoning. Cheng Zihua, commander-in-chief of the PLA's defending troops, ordered an extra Maxim to be issued to each squad. Maxims not only helped the PLA in winning the blocking action at Pagoda Mountain near Jinzhou, but also the People's Volunteer Army in the Korean War. Not until the 1950s was the Maxim retired from service, being replaced by the Chinese Type 54 heavy machine gun. It's amazing to see that most modern machine guns still borrow from the Maxim's technology. Even though weaponry has advanced by leaps and bounds, the Maxim remains a true legend on and off the battlefield.